The old hospital stood on a hill, its dark windows like empty eyes staring out at the town below. It had been abandoned for years, but rumors of its hauntings persisted. Some said that the ghosts of the patients who had died there still lingered, trapped in the building. Others said that the hospital was a gateway to another dimension, a place where evil creatures could come and go as they pleased. No one knew for sure what really happened in the old hospital, but the stories were enough to keep people away. One night, a group of teenagers decided to explore the hospital. They had heard the stories, but they didn't believe them. They thought it would be fun to spend a night in the old building and see if anything happened. They arrived at the hospital late at night. The moon was full and the stars were out. The building was eerily quiet. The teenagers crept inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. They made their way through the empty halls, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. They could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. Suddenly, they heard a noise. They froze, their hearts in their throats. The noise came again, closer this time. It sounded like someone was crying. The teenagers followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was open, and the light from their flashlights spilled in. In the middle of the room was a girl, sitting on the floor. She was crying, and her clothes were torn. "What's wrong?" one of the teenagers asked. The girl looked up at them, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "They're coming," she said. "They're coming for me." The teenagers didn't know what to say. They just stood there, frozen in fear. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and the door to the room slammed shut. The teenagers were trapped. They heard the girl scream, and then there was silence. The teenagers huddled together, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't know what to do. They stayed in the room for what felt like hours, but eventually, they worked up the courage to leave. They ran out of the hospital and didn't look back. They never went back to the hospital, and they never talked about what happened that night. But they never forgot the girl's screams or the feeling of being trapped in that dark, empty building. The next day, the teenagers went to the police. They told the police what they had seen, but the police didn't believe them. They said that the hospital was just an old building and that there was nothing to be afraid of. But the teenagers knew what they had seen, and they knew that the hospital was haunted. They never went back to the town, and they never told anyone else what had happened. But the story of the haunted hospital still persists, and people still whisper about the girl who was crying in the room at the end of the hall. The teenager's story spread quickly, and soon others were eager to explore the abandoned hospital. Some came out of curiosity, while others came looking for a thrill. But no one who went into the hospital ever came out the same. Some were found wandering the halls, dazed and confused. Others were found hiding in rooms, too afraid to come out. And some were never found at all. The police investigated the disappearances, but they could never find any evidence of foul play. They said that the teenagers had probably gotten lost and wandered off, or that they had been overcome by their own fear. But the people who knew the truth knew that something else was going on. They knew that the hospital was haunted, and that the ghosts of the past were still there, waiting for their next victims. One night, a group of college students decided to investigate the hospital. They had heard the stories, but they didn't believe them. They thought it would be fun to spend a night in the old building and see if anything happened. They arrived at the hospital late at night. The moon was full, and the stars were out. The building was eerily quiet. The students crept inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. They made their way through the empty halls, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. They could hear the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. Suddenly, they heard a noise. They froze, their hearts in their throats. The noise came again, closer this time. It sounded like someone was walking towards them.